today I'm starting a new sermon series, and so I want to give you a little intro to the sermon. We have adopted new values here at Memphis First United Methodist. Those values are that the Christ in me receives the Christ in you, the Christ in me responds to the Christ in you, and the Christ in us transforms the world. And this week, I had my yearly, what is called District Committee of Ministry meeting, where I do my regular pastoral check-in. They're asking me different questions about the health of the church. And I told them about our new value statement, and there were about 7 pastors in there and a couple of lay people in there, and they were all super excited. They were like, say that again, and they were writing it down. So they really liked our value statement, and these are people who do this for a living. So I am really excited about this. So let me start here. A couple of years ago, I was driving through some road work, and I saw that there was a worker. You know how at the entrance of the road work, there's always a worker standing there with a sign that says, slow down? I saw the worker there, and what the worker was wearing caught my eye. And of course, part of it was supposed to catch my eye. The worker was wearing reflective gear, like there was a yellow reflective vest so that the drivers could see him easily and he wouldn't get hit. But what actually caught my eye about what the road worker was wearing was something that wasn't supposed to catch my eye. Because the road worker was also wearing camouflage. And it seemed to me that the bro was caught somewhere between 2 universes, 2 desires. He wanted to be seen, but he clearly didn't want to be seen. I was telling a friend about it later, and my friend told me that there is, in fact, a whole internet group of photos of this exact same thing. People having the exact same experience. A whole host of photos of people wearing both camouflage and reflective gear at the same time, like it's some kind of road worker style. Like the Department of Transportation employees just can't decide whether they want to be seen or not. Visible or hidden. Employees caught between 2 universes, 2 desires. And as absurd as this is, this made me think immediately about, as I was reading the texts from the lectionary today, I immediately started thinking about this imagery of wanting to be seen and yet somehow not wanting to be seen at the same time. And I immediately, my mind just started doing this jumble thing where I was connecting it to the story of Moses entering the cloud that protects God from being seen, and yet Moses goes and talks face to face with God as a man speaks to a friend. And in a similar story, the cloud comes down and rests on the mountain where the disciples are, and they see Jesus, and they see Jesus transfigured before them. And so there is this sense in which the cloud and the voice makes God not seen at all, and yet Jesus' true self is seen and revealed. Like God is caught between 2 universes. 2 desires, hidden yet visible, wanting to be seen and yet refusing to be seen. And honestly, this contradiction, or if I can say it in a more friendly way, this tension, I think is at work in all of Christian belief. That God wears camouflage and God also wears reflectors. That God is hidden, and yet God is revealed. God is unfathomable, and yet God becomes incarnate. God covers God's self in a cloud so that we cannot draw near, and yet God also speaks to us face to face. God's voice is thunder that frightens us, and yet God also lays a hand on our shoulder and says, "Don't be afraid." I used the word contradiction a second ago, which is like a bad word in church. But maybe it is a harsher sounding word. But maybe in some sense, I think we need the the harshness of a word like that in order to sort of jar us out of our numbness when we think about God so that we can understand a little more about what we're actually encountering when we encounter God. The word contradiction helps us reflect on the serious flaw that I think is at work in most of the way we think about God. Namely, the assumption that any of us can claim to understand God or understand Christ. The cloud, the hiddenness of God, the sheer otherness of God means that I'm saying this as a pastor, I'm saying this as a representative of a church, I can never understand God. I can never contain God. I can never even imagine God. I can never capture God. And any of my attempts or assumptions that I have done so all reduce God to what I think is possible. The otherness of God, the transcendence of God, is not merely that God is so different from us that we could never imagine. It is mostly that God is completely unpredictable to us. The ways we think God should or ought or will work in the world, God is in the business of surprising us and saying, you can't even imagine what I'm about to do. This is why the church's greatest theologian, St. Augustine, said nearly 2,000 years ago, if you understand, it is not God you understand. If American Christians could just get this idea. Can you imagine if we were deeply offended, not by the language someone speaks at halftime, but if we were deeply offended by right or left politicians talking about God like they know the will of God? That's a nonpartisan statement. The man always wants to use God talk to control you. But the whole point of these stories in Scripture is that God cannot be reduced to my agendas. God will not be reduced to my plans. God will not be reduced to my politics. God will not be reduced to my partisanship. God will not be reduced to the voice in my head. God will not be reduced to my mother's voice in my head. God is not reducible. The hiddenness of God is therefore on purpose. God refuses to be captured by us, refuses to be reduced by us. Even by our thoughts about God, God cannot be reduced to such things. This is why in our value statement, I place the word "the" at the very beginning, the Christ. Because the rest of the statement will refer to Christ in me. The rest of the statement is going to refer to Christ in you. The rest of the statement is going to refer to Christ transforming the world, God's activity in the world. But I wanted this subtle reminder at the very beginning of our value statement that Christ is the Christ of God. He does not belong to me. He may be in me, but he does not belong to me. I do not own him. I don't get to define him or set the parameters around him or what he feels or what he approves of or who he would vote for. He is the Christ of God. He is not my son. He's not my property. If I make him into my agenda, if I make him into my son, if I make him into my property, then I have turned Jesus Christ into an idol who is less than who he really is. Do you see? This is how this works in America. We talk about being a Christian nation, but what we mean is, and this is right or left, we talk about being a Christian nation and we reduce God to whatever agenda that we have. And so we use the right language, Jesus, Christianity, the Bible, the Holy Spirit, the Father, but we don't mean what the Bible meant by those things. I saw a politician, this is free. I saw a politician this last week asking about the Epstein files to our Attorney General. Listed all this massive long list of offenses against vulnerable young girls in the Epstein files. And our Attorney General responded and said, I think he said, the politician said something like, so-and-so's name is in these files more than God's name is even in the book about God, and held up a Bible. And our Attorney General responded to this list of degradations of young girls by saying, how dare you insult the Bible like that? Even the Bible gets honored while reducing, in order to deflect and distract from the grievous offenses and injustice against young girls made in the image of God. This country is disgusting with that kind of thing, and that is not a partisan statement. You see it on the left too. We're walking around assuming that God is our son, that Jesus is our son, and in this we are reducing Jesus to an idol that serves me. He is, first of all, God's beloved son. He is, in the transfiguration story, the one in whom God takes the deepest pleasure. And when Jesus' clothes shine brightly on that mountain with the cloud overhead, that is Matthew's way of reminding us that despite the flesh and blood that veils it, Jesus is just as glorious, just as other, just as transcendent, just as uncontainable and irreducible and unsafe as the Father. I don't mean unsafe like God, like Jesus wants to step on you. What I mean is Jesus is unsafe because he refuses to be reduced to you. I tell my students at the seminary all the time, I say the nature of idolatry is it takes the transcendent God and reduces God to someone usable. And a usable deity can only serve me. I can never serve that deity. Maybe let me say this a little more colloquially to get my point across. God is so other than us, so irreducible to us, that all our language for God fails to capture God. I've started saying it this way to myself and to my students. All God talk is spoken with a stutter. I don't speak clearly about God. If I'm speaking clearly about God and I'm sure I'm saying the right things, Augustine says you don't actually know what you're talking about. This is the danger of having a reducible, usable God. You can speak of that God with all kinds of certainty. And I'm telling you now, you could listen to any podcast. A group of young men is called a podcast. Listen to any podcast of the Theo Bros, and they're so sure. They just know. They know who God is and they know how you should live your life. And I'm telling you, some of those guys don't grow out of it. Some of them are 80 years old, having lived an entire life and still talking about God like they know God in a way that reduces God. And they for sure know what you should do with your life. I think the beauty of Methodism is that we have this humility that says all God talk is spoken with a stutter. But the weakness of Methodism is that we think that because we can only talk God with a stutter, that therefore we really shouldn't say much. And I think both of those things have to be brought together. We have to recognize our inability to articulate God, and yet at the same time recognize that this God who we cannot articulate has chosen to come to be with us. The Christ is in me. The Christ is in you. The Christ is in the world working. When Christ is just in me but is not other than me, then I reduce God to my whims. When Christ is in you but is not other than you, then I am reducing Christ to your agenda. When Christ is in us but not other than us, then we take the reins and we think it is our Christian duty to transform the world. But this statement is stated on purpose. It is Christ in me, not Christ reduced to me. It is Christ in you, not Christ reduced to you. And who transforms the world? Not me and you. It is the Christ in us. When we recognize that God is transcendent and hidden and uncontrollable and irreducible, that is the starting place of these values. This is what Peter had to learn on that mountain. He sees Jesus miraculously transformed in that cloud. He encounters the otherness of Jesus, and what is the first thing he does? I think I'd like to contain this. Let me put it under some tents so I can box it in. Let me mark this spot so that this holiness, and he probably has good intentions, but what he wants to do is he wants to remember the moment in a way that is unchanged. He proposes building tents of meeting like Moses did, built so we can capture the moment and control it. And then God does the unpredictable, unsafe thing and speaks from the hiddenness of the cloud and said, "This is my son, not yours. I am pleased with him as he is, but you neither see him as he is, nor will you always like what you do see. But I am always pleased with him." So no, there will be no tents, because neither I nor my son are reducible or usable or safe or containable. This is what the Hebrew prophets always said after Israel's temple was destroyed, and they were like, how can we ever encounter God again? The temple's destroyed. And the prophets were like, God was never restricted to the temple. God's not restricted to this church building. God is not restricted to your heart. But, and we'll unpack this in coming weeks, the God who wears camouflage also wears a reflector vest. At the very moment when God speaks from the cloud, when Jesus shines brighter than the sun and Peter cowers in fear, Jesus places his hand on Peter's shoulder and says, "Don't be afraid." Understand that God is so other than you that if you think you know God, you know nothing. Understand that God is so other than us that God feels overwhelming and terrifying sometimes. Understand that Christ is so other than you that you must speak about Christ with a stutter. But also understand that Moses spoke with a stutter. And Paul seems to refer to himself having some kind of a speech impediment. And yet God's otherness and intimacy is seen in the fact that those who speak with a stutter still are invited to speak. God will not be reduced to our words. Christ will not be reduced to being in me and you. God will always be hidden, and yet God's camel also has reflector vests. Let me say it this way, because the God who cannot be perceived still wants to be received. The God who cannot be perceived still wants to be received. That's why it's important to recognize we speak God with a stutter. God reveals God's self always in ways that we just don't recognize. God is speaking and revealing God's self to us in all kinds of different ways that seem veiled to us, and yet what Christianity is training us to do is have eyes that see. Not to control, not to reduce, not to contain, but to see and receive and respond to as God transforms the world. Paul says that the ways that God is received in this world are the ways we would never anticipate or even want. Paul says that the power of God is revealed in the cross of Christ. Sit with that. God's power is revealed in a man helplessly nailed to a tree. You want to talk about something that feels fundamentally contradictory, and yet what Paul is saying is if you miss weakness, if you miss vulnerability, if you miss poverty, if you miss powerlessness, if you miss the lynching, if you miss the grief of death, then you miss God. The gospel tells us that the sovereignty of God is captured in an infant whose parents have to flee state violence. And Jesus told us that God is most powerfully seen in the poor, in the unhoused, in the immigrants who aren't welcome, and in the widows who are grieving. And all of that means that God is not revealed in any conventional, containable, controllable way. God can never be perceived, but God is always wanting to be received in those very things we usually ignore. Which I think is why it is absolutely amazing that Jesus says that something as simple and ignorable as bread and juice are his body. We don't take communion, we receive it as a mystery beyond our perception. The unordinary God is revealed in ordinary bread, still camouflaged, still other, still hidden, and yet visible. Camouflaged with reflectors on, just to let us know, don't be afraid. I am absolutely going to rock your world, and it is not going to feel safe, but don't be afraid. I'm here. The Christ in me receives the Christ in you. The Christ in me responds to the Christ in you, and the Christ in us is transforming the world. All of that is happening at this table.